Let me read to you a passage from the 6th chapter of St. Mark's Gospel, verses 34 to 44. It's the Gospel for Tuesday after the Epiphany. St. Mark writes, "When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. 'This is a remote place,' they said, 'and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat.' But he answered, 'You give them something to eat.' They said to him, 'That would take 8 months of a man's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?' 'How many loaves do you have?' he asked. 'Go and see.' When they found out, they said, 5, and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. That's from Mark chapter 6, verses 34 to 44. Let's think of the significance of those loaves and fish. You know, there is a beautiful little book of just a few pages in the Old Testament, wedged between the book of Judges and the 2 books of Samuel. I refer to the book of Ruth, which tells the story of a Moabite woman who was joined to the Israelite people by her marriage with Boaz of Bethlehem. The story opens in the time of the Judges, that is, the period between Moses and David. And a man from Bethlehem of Judah left with his wife and 2 sons to go to Moab because of a famine. Once there, he died, leaving his wife Naomi. Her 2 sons married Moabite women, and after 10 years, those 2 sons died. Naomi was left with no one and nothing, when word reached her that the famine had lifted back in Bethlehem. So she decided to return to her own people. One of her 2 daughters-in-law chose reluctantly to stay behind, but Ruth, the other, resolved to remain with Naomi and went with her to Bethlehem. Ruth shows admirable filial piety. Naomi was an ordinary, obscure woman of Bethlehem, and her pagan daughter-in-law was Ruth. The attention of the book is on Ruth, loyal and obedient to Naomi, and resolved that, and I quote, "Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." Chapter 1, verse 16. So we are speaking of what we might call a humble, good, unimportant nobody. Because of various circumstances, she marries Boaz. And what then happens? Ruth bears a son, Obed, and Obed was the grandfather of King David. So Ruth, the obscure, pagan Moabitess, became the great-grandmother of King David, and as it turns out, an ancestor of the Messiah. This brief but very significant book ends with a very brief genealogy connecting Perez, the son of Judah, with Boaz, the husband of Ruth, and David, their descendant. This genealogy, in turn, is used by St. Matthew in his genealogy of the Messiah, and Matthew specifically mentions Ruth. In the next stage of his genealogy, that between David and the exile to Babylon, Matthew again mentions an ordinary woman, the wife of Uriah. Following David's murder of Uriah, she was taken by him in marriage and bore to him King Solomon. So we have two otherwise obscure women who amid commonplace happenings were chosen in the providential plan of God to be instruments of his mighty salvific purposes. God seems to delight in using small and ordinary things to bring forth something great and beautiful. In our Gospel today, from Mark chapter 6 verse 34 to 44, we read that, and I quote, "When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things." May we not see in that large crowd a symbol of the world, the flow of peoples through history, the concourse of mankind whom our Lord was to save? There lay a large crowd before him, and they were like sheep without a shepherd. At the end of his teaching, our Lord directed his disciples to feed them. All they had was 5 loaves and 2 fish, with 5,000 men before them, not mentioning any women and children among them. Contemplate those 5 loaves and 2 fish, and the task ahead. Contemplate, for that matter, the task of redemption that lay ahead, and how God had used the likes of Ruth and the wife of Uriah. If it is God's plan, nothing is impossible to him, however modest be the means at hand. With the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and with his very ordinary disciples carrying out his orders, our Lord fed the vast crowd to their heart's content and left them fully satisfied. You know, a feeling common to so many people is, what have I to show for myself? What is my life amounting to? Especially in view of the failures and the ordinariness of my course. I command no special respect among my acquaintances. I cannot point to much in the way of achievements in the past or in the present. My marriage has had all its ups and downs, and my children leave so much to be desired. I am a failure, or at least I am not much of a success. All that seems to lie before me is an uneventful life, an ordinary round, like the donkey doing not much more than going round and round pulling the wheel. But no, let the thought of those 5 loaves and the 2 fish give every person hope in God. He can use my life such as it is. I am but a piece of one of those loaves. God can multiply the effects of my unworthy efforts. I must, within my very limited round, keep his will and grow in his friendship. Despite my poverty of life and soul, through the mercy of God, I have a place given to me. Let me present myself to him and place myself in his hands. What mattered was the blessing of Christ on those loaves, followed by the breaking of them. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. Let us ask him to take us into his hands, to raise his eyes and confer on us his blessing. Then, as with the loaves, so with us, we must be broken. That is to say, an indispensable part of being blessed by Jesus Christ is the presence of the cross. It was necessary that Jesus suffer and so enter his glory. It is necessary that we follow in his footsteps as he carries his cross. It is necessary that, as with the loaves and the fishes which he broke in his hands, so our path is that of the cross. With the cross, provided we carry it with Christ, we shall reign.